better never ends. In health, in performance, no matter your starting point, you can always strive for better. My name's Charlie Goodchild, I'm your host, and this is the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, and inspiring you to discover yours. Okay, today I'm very, very pleased to welcome Coach Nick Garcia, into the podcast studio. So Nick Garcia is strength and conditioning coach who works alongside me here in central London, and we work together really closely on Josh Patterson's 76 marathons in 76 days in 76 cities. So we know each other well, and ever since that we've been speaking about having this conversation and a bit more detail on what does it take to train someone towards that kind of goal, but also what is your S&C philosophy like, and how do we learn from your mentality? So Nick, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me on, mate.
And we were just talking about the setup here as well. And what do you call yourself?
Yeah, I said I feel like I'm about to make a rap album, and I'm pretty much the Australian Skepta right now. But yeah, well, I think the next time we have a podcast, I can share some of those lyrics with you, but we'll stick to the running stuff today. I think would be better.
Yeah, we'll stick to that for now. If things go off into some kind of rap tangent, then we're fine.
Yeah,
we'll go with it. So maybe we need a metronome coming so we can get on beat. But Nick, you're an SC coach. You obviously got a pretty strong Australian accent. So tell us your journey. Tell us about where things started for you out in Oz and how you ended up out here in London.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, my accent only gets strong because I live in Clapham, so I'm just surrounded by more Australians, so it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. So I started out doing my undergrad, my exercise sports science degree in Melbourne in Australia, and was working as a personal trainer, just general pop, and then started to delve more into sports performance and more of the elite athlete side of things. Worked with a rugby club in Melbourne, as well as with individual athletes in all different sports. I then decided to go down the route of like junior athlete performance and created a company with some coaches in Oz trying to help out young kids sort of get to the next level in their sport. So then went in and enrolled into my master's in Melbourne as well. And then I was sort of dabbling in team sports setting stuff, and I was working the AFL, then trying to get into the NBL, which is the National Basketball League in Australia, with a team in Melbourne. And I'd quickly come to realise that I didn't really like the team setting stuff, more because I'd already been working on my own business and by myself, self-employed, and had seen that for me, having freedom of time and being able to dictate your own working hours and your lifestyle was something that was very, very important. And when you work for a team, unfortunately, they dictate what your lifestyle and working hours are like. Yeah. And for the most part, for anyone who knows a coach who works in elite sport, it is relentless, the time and effort they have to put in. Even their days off, they're still on the laptop, they're still working. And it's, you're limited with how much money you can make as well, and unless you're at the top, really, really top end of that area, and niching in something maybe that a team contracts you in for or something like that. But I just thought at that time was just not right for me, so I decided to just do my own thing, go sort of like one-to-one with athletes. Then I found myself moving over to London, and I didn't have any connections, and I just found it really hard to sort of get back into that. So found myself going back to general pop, and then, yes, just slowly built up my networks and connections, and have come to Until, kept running my own business, and now I guess I'm working with some elite athletes, but more, I guess that the population I work with are people who are driven individuals who have some sort of goal in mind in terms of like a performance goal they're trying to achieve, whether it be running or a triathlon or even in sport. I've got a basketball player, a tennis player, play high level. and it's just helping them just get better at their sport and perform better.
So it sounds a lot like you work with people who just have a mindset that want to get better but don't necessarily know how to, and then you kind of come in with those coaching philosophies and support them towards that. But something I really picked up on there you were talking about was that you're around the sport side of things, and both of us I think have come a similar journey here where we've probably got into this industry because we're sporty, athletic, we enjoy it, thinking that we'd end up being a coach or a physio for a sports team. Is that right? Because that was definitely my avenue too. I thought that'd be me too.
You know, again, I guess with most people's journeys within the sports setting and in undergraduate degrees within sport or exercise and health, you're sort of led to believe that is the epitome of success, is to go into elite sport, whatever sport they may be. In Oz, it was rugby league, AFL. That's like, if you worked in that, that's insane. You know, like you were the best. But
I was the same. So I remember, but wanting to believe that too. You know, not just being led to believe, but that's what I wanted to believe, that I will do my sports science degree, and then I will do my physio masters, and I will work my way somehow into pro sports. And then the reality was very different. Once you got there, it was exactly the same experience as you actually, Nick. It was long hours, lots of travel, terrible pay. You know, I started my career as a physio within an occupational health facility in a factory in Dagenham, and I was on much more money there than I was working for Saracens Academy rugby team, which I know where the pressure really is. Like, the pressure is like the rugby stuff, the pressure, there's big decisions to make, like that's, and yet you're paid pittance. And ultimately the reality is that there's so many people that want to be in those jobs that they get away with paying whatever they want. So they don't have to pay to attract people. They just put the job out there for as cheap as they can, and someone will make the compromise. But what happens there is that there ends up being this slight shift in the type of people that take those roles on. They're people who can be bankrolled, can afford it, are comfortable. Doesn't matter so much for money. So you actually get this almost shift away from diversity within those jobs, because it takes a certain type of person with a certain type of socioeconomic background in order to accept it and ride that wave of no money in order to maybe get lucky in the end and make some money.
Well, that's it. And I think the really good coaches that go into these roles, I know for myself, I worked so hard and I had to accompany that time I spent with not being paid with doing something to pay for my rent and my food, right? And you had probably to do the same.
I had 5 jobs.
Yeah, I worked crazy hours. I worked to the point where like it cost me a relationship. That's how it was mental. But you did it because that's what you were given an opportunity, and that's just what you do. But like you said, the problem is then the good coaches, they can't do that forever. You can't live that life forever, right? And then I came to realize that I could just do better off on my own and do my own thing and dictate my own hours, my own work, decide who I want to work with. And then also the pressure of, like, within a team setting, if you have a player, I mean, as a physio, it must be worse, but if you have a player that gets injured or your team doesn't win, I mean, your head is on the chopping block as well, just as much as the players and the coaches, right? So it's, from an injury standpoint, it could be something that is like from an external factor, that a player has a collision with another player.
Totally irrelevant to me, but
it's reflected on you.
You've had 4 injuries in this tournament. You know, what's going on in the physio department? You know, we all do it, even in the sports we follow as supporters. Yeah. We're like, oh, what are the medical team doing wrong in that team? And sometimes it might be the medical team that's doing it, and maybe the wider performance team, including S&C coaches, for example. Other times it might not be, and it's really easy to make that flippant judgment that because they've had loads of injuries, they need to sack their physios. Therefore, it will solve that problem.
Yes, I totally can sympathise with people that do step away from elite sport, pro sport coaching, because there's a lot of pressure, and the reward, you have to really love the sport. That's what I say to people who, like, young coaches that ask me about my journey, or ones that want to get involved with it, and they ask, why didn't you stay in team sport or like, oh, I want to do it. And I just say to them, you have to really love the sport. You have to really love what you do with those people, because otherwise you're going to work to a point where you start to hate it, I think.
Yeah. I also found that there was a bit too much repetition of the same kind of stuff. Not necessarily exactly the same injuries, but you do a lot of concussion management. You do a lot of bruises. You do a lot of muscle strains, and you do a bit of tendon management. But you can't do that very well because they've got to train anyway, so they can't really load manage. So you just do a lot of stuff that doesn't stretch you that much clinically, and then all of a sudden you've got like a major injury on the pitch to deal with that's like big and important, and you've got to be switched on for. And almost all of the rest of the time you're watching training, watching gym sessions, traveling on buses, not actually sharpening your skills, not actually doing anything that valuable. So I got a bit stale. I got a bit bored actually of my job, and which I never thought I would. I always thought it would be the best thing to be doing that stuff, and it's fun. There's banter, there's camaraderie, which is okay, but it's not actually as clinically stimulating for me personally. That it just didn't quite suit me and my, I don't know, curiosity. That there wasn't enough of that. So once I stepped away from nearly full-time sport to going back into clinical practice, it was much better, and then I just did the sport stuff on the side more occasionally. I got all the good stuff and none of the day-to-day, boredom for me.
Well, that's how I feel with what I'm in at the moment too, is I get to choose, and the people that come to train with me, they listen and do what I say. I don't have to. I was having a problem when I was working for this rugby club where the head coach didn't really see the value of doing acceleration and speed work. And even in pre-season, I was like, we should be trying to do these sorts of conditioning drills and do these. And he was like, no, just get them to run laps pretty much. And I was just like, oh, fuck's sake. Yeah. So I don't have to have these conversations with anyone anymore, because I just grab the athlete and tell them, look, this is what we're going to do because this will give you this. And they say, great. They go and do it. I don't have to have an argument with anybody.
Yeah. And there's something quite difficult and demotivating, demoralizing about doing a job and not being listened to. I think I was pretty lucky actually in most of my jobs that I had good relationships with coaches, with the support staff. But you know that example that you've just said, I know is not unique. And lots of people have that struggle as physios or coaches, where they're essentially dictated as to what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to practice, which isn't always in line with their values and their ways of practice.
I know at a top level Premier League team, they had a change in management, as in head coach management. And we know a lot of people that work in these different clubs here at Until, for example. Their workload would change, as in the physio or the strength conditioning coach's workload would change, as well as like the way that they deliver their sessions or the programming would change, just because the head coach has decided, I want to do more of this, or I want to do more of that, or I don't think that is relevant. And then your role becomes more involved or less involved, and it's not even up to you. You don't make that decision. Yeah. So I think it is a lot more difficult, and it's a lot more complex than people think. People just think, oh, you become a strength conditioning coach with a football, like Premier League football club. That must be amazing. Yeah, there's parts of it that are glamorous, but I don't think a lot of it is great. Well, not for me anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you become your own coach. I think it seems to suit you very well, and you're thriving within your field. Let's maybe speak about you came over, you told your journey here, you've collaborated, well, you've consolidated, should I say, your role, and found that you needed a space like Until, and you've managed to build up a good list of clients. So one of those clients ended up being Josh Patterson. Sorry, this is where we worked together, and we first had this chat probably about just over a year ago, wasn't it? Because he was running by now. So just over a year ago, we had that chat about how do we train someone? How do we design a program around something that's never been done before, with nowhere near enough time to prepare for it? So,
yeah, I mean, to give you the long story short, is we had 12 weeks.
Yeah,
I think it was just about.
It was kind of less than that in the end as well, because he faffed about for a week and a half, and we didn't end up seeing him until after Christmas.
Yeah, that's right. It was during Christmas and New Year, so we had this weird period. We'd started with him. We had less than 12 weeks. It was horrible.
Yeah,
and you have all these things as a coach and a and a physiotherapist you're trying to implement into someone's program that is so hard in a short space of time, and everybody wants to do what they think is right. So it was a case of trying to come together as a team first of all.
It was a group of individuals that had never worked together that were suddenly picked at relative randomness, but with a tiny little kind of sort of semi-interview from Josh, and he picks them, and then we've just got to see whether we can work together. It's like this team that's never worked together has now got nowhere near enough time to set this guy up. So yeah, I remember the moment when we started chatting as a team of, I think there was 4 of us that were chatting on this call, and we just went, all of us were talking our own way, and then there was something that happened. I think it was around his training load or his running distance, and we all agreed, all of a sudden, this needs to change. Let's figure this out. What's our central message?
Yeah, and then I think just credit to all of us. No one came in trying to be, the
we didn't have a leader actually.
No, we didn't have like a Billy Big Bollock sort of like, try to step up too much. But it worked for the people in our group, I think.
Yeah.
And everyone got to do what they needed to. And then Josh ultimately went out and completed the challenge. But look, I think throughout those weeks leading up to him starting the challenge, I think he felt like it was quite seamless from us, like as in the way the team worked.
Yeah.
He did everything that we asked of him. Even when we asked for changes, he did them as well. So it was good to have someone that was bought into what we were trying to do too. But it was definitely tough, and there were times where I was like, oh my gosh, are we actually going to pull this off?
Yeah, it was really messy behind the scenes, but hopefully the way that we worked together allowed it to not seem like that for him, because ultimately it kind of had to be messy. We had to figure it out in a messy way in order to come to some form of central message and figure things out on the fly, because that's what it was, a total make it up as we go along, based on our principles and our understanding of running an endurance event. So I had Josh on the podcast last year, so within that you'll hear him say he was very complimentary about how he felt the team worked together. So yeah, despite the messiness, we did make it work. So from your perspective as an S&C coach, what were the key things you were using as your linchpins, your real fundamental principles for him in order to achieve what he did?
So, initially it was just with the assessment, the strength testing we did on him, and then really just try to build up where he was at and look at the imbalances he had, because under fatigue, and in Josh's case of the 76 marathons, extreme cases of fatigue, that's where you can see the breakdown start to happen the most, right? So asymmetries, although I agree that everyone has some form of asymmetry, we're never going to be totally symmetrical, 100% agree with that. We want to limit the amount that he has, because when he was getting into those stages where he was super, super tired and body is breaking down, then we have those asymmetries start to, they're exacerbated, I suppose, right?
You have an inability to compensate because you're fatigued everywhere.
Yeah.
So sure, you've got a left-sided weakness, your right side might compensate. But if your left side is weak and your right side is absolutely fatigued and has no energy left, then there's no ability to compensate, therefore overload to left side.
Yeah.
So that's my understanding as well. I totally agree that when under extreme conditions, symmetries become more relevant, and it's a performance metric we're looking at there, not an everyday person metric.
Yeah. So
what were the kind of but let's go to the tests just while we're on the subject. What were your tests that you decided to use for him, and if you can remember roughly, what were the kind of things we ended up seeing? Don't worry about exacts, but
so I mean, I guess for anyone, I'll use Josh as the example, but we looked at calf strength, so gastroc, soleus, the muscles around the calf and the shin. We looked at the strength of that area for him. Then we looked at muscles up of the leg, so we looked at hamstring, quads, and glutes, but more so trying to look at it at the specific angles that he would be that would be similar to what he would be using in running, right? So trying to see what he's like expressing strength, expressing force in those joint angles that he would be when he's running. Now, again, like I don't know which was, I can't remember if it was right or left side, couldn't tell you, but he did have a significant asymmetry between right to left side, specifically posteriorly through hamstring and his calves.
Mm-hmm.
So that was for me first priority, try to like iron those out and make sure that there was a bit more balance between strength right to left side.
How did you test these? Was it force plates?
We did force plate, the vowed, the
Forced
vowed
X.
forced X. And yeah, so again, I can't remember the exact number, but the difference right to left side, particularly hamstring strength, was something like 15 to 20%.
Which even in a normal non-performance based athlete, I'd be looking at that as an area to improve.
Right.
So as a physio, I'd be thinking that's still a big enough deficit that could cause you problems in general recreational exercise.
Yeah. So that was the priority number one, was to try and iron out any imbalances that we had. And the second one for me was just trying to build strength in these positions that I mentioned before, but as well as like try to build the capacity within the tendon to absorb the amount of load that Josh was going to be doing, which was a lot. So,
yeah, and why specifically the tendons here? Why do you think that's so relevant for something like that?
They are the components of the muscular structure that absorb load, right? Mm-hmm. So they take the load and then it's like I don't know how to use the analogy for this, but it's like they absorbing the load and they can just like push it back out, right? So the springiness, yeah. So trying to build on the ability of the tendon to absorb more load.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to, and we did use isometrics as a key component of Josh's program, specifically because his running load throughout that training period was so high, and I wanted to really not overload him and fatigue him muscularly, and try to give him. We want some overcompensation. We want to try to overload the muscle and the tendon, but was really trying to hold back onto doing it too much so that it would affect his run, or even worse, could cause injury. Then we have another setback to deal with.
Yeah, and this is the specifics around this case is that most people going through a training routine will run a few times a week, and they'll have scope within that to strength train once or twice a week, and they'll have enough recovery either side of those and enough ability to change the intensity of their running or the volume of their running to allow adaptations both in strength through normal training. So, dynamic squats, not isometric, for example, so actually moving through range. But our decision, and mainly led by your decisions actually, was doing the movement-based strength training is going to increase fatigue levels for him and therefore compromise his ability to do enough running volume to prep him in the short space of time that we had. Therefore, let's change to a more static position, which is what isometric means, static position of contraction, to build it in a different way that doesn't cause as much fatigue, but still drive some form of positive adaptation to his tendons and therefore reduce injury risk. So it was, and I remember hearing your reasoning and thinking, bloody hell, yeah, that makes total sense. I think that's a really smart way of managing that complex situation. And I mean, it worked. So
yeah, so
as far as we can tell.
Yeah, I think within the 76 marathons, I remember that one day we went out to Bath and we saw him pretty broken. But apart from that, I think we were expecting some sort of fatigue and breakdown, of course. That would be silly if you didn't. But it wasn't to any extent that it was going to stop him from running, really, at any point. And he wasn't too broken. So yeah, I think it worked well. I'd like to think it worked well.
Yeah, and I guess the interesting part from your side of it was that once he'd started, you couldn't really do much else from a strength and conditioning perspective, can you? It's like, okay, well, I'll just come along for the ride and join on a couple and have a bit of fun. But
he was asking me, I don't know if I told you, he messaged me like halfway through, must have been like, 15, 20 marathons in, and he's like, hey, geezer, can I just ask you for a favor? And I was like, yeah, what's up? And I'm thinking like something super serious. And he's like, so we're just pulling into a gym. Is there some extras I can do? And I was like, no, man, I think you like run 20 marathons or so. Like maybe just concentrate on your recovery within these marathons. He's like, no. Like some upper body stuff, just because I'm losing some size and some shape up top. Like I want to make sure that I'm still looking good. Yeah. I was thinking, bloody hell, this guy's running so many marathons and he's still thinking about extra work to do. My God.
Yeah, I mean, it just sums him up really. Like the mentality of that is just, it's so fascinating to me that he's looking for more work. And obviously, when you run that much, you are going to lose some muscle, and you can't consume enough calories in order to not. But for him, that was important. He doesn't want to lose too much because it's a part of his body image is that he wants to have that stature, and it was really important actually after. In fact, that's really fascinating to think of it. During, you didn't really have much of an impact. Before, you did a lot and you were a big part of his programming. After, you've ended up engaging back with him a lot because he really wanted to get his physical strength back, didn't he? Because he'd lost a lot of strength and size. So tell us a bit then about what happened after he'd run.
Yeah, and then after he'd run, he came to me and he was half the man that he was at the beginning of the marathon.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah, so we had a fun time building him back up, but he likes to train.
Yeah.
He likes being in the gym and he likes to train. So then we're just building him back up, getting him in a surplus, eating well. He put his size back on quite quickly and was back to where he was pre-race quite quickly. But then we tested him maybe, I think it was the end of last year, maybe November. So yeah, I can't remember I don't know how long that is after his actual finishing the last marathon.
About 6 months, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
So 6 months after the challenge, and this
Maybe
is
a bit less.
And then during that time, obviously he'd still been training a fair bit with me, and then he did his testing, and all of his tests come back better than where he was pre-challenge, and the asymmetries were much more balanced, which was great. So the imbalances between right to left side were much more balanced. And he just told me he was feeling loads better and he was running well. He had a really, really annoying issue with his calf that kept coming up, and that seemed to have gone away. His hamstrings were a lot better. That was not so bad. So, I mean, it took a while, but got there in the end.
Yeah, I saw him a few times quite soon after because he probably had a stress reaction, bone stress in his foot. So I was seeing him for a little while, but once that cleared up, I didn't really have much else to do because he was fine. So the idea was that we'd carry on supporting him, but he's not needed me, so I've not seen him, which is I take as a good thing and good news that he's training well. And it was great to see that symmetry come back on the force plate retest because it shows all the work that we'd been doing before and after had actually worked out well. So if he does decide he wants to do anything else in the future, he should be even more robust again.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but it's fascinating to see that you become the athlete that you train to be. So beforehand he was muscular, cardiovascularly fit, generally looked athletic. Then he becomes an ultra marathon runner and looks like an ultra marathon runner. And then he decides he doesn't want that and he wants to become athletic again. So he trains that and now he looks it. So it's really interesting about that, isn't it? That you essentially you are how you train.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we use some of the learnings or perhaps just some of the things that you would do generally anyway, if an average person comes in to see you and they want to become a better runner, what are the kind of things you're thinking of as a coach? What kind of stuff will you help them to work towards?
It's first of all, try to see where they're at in terms of what their training experience, I think in personal training, in terms of what their training age is, but more I want to look at what their training experience is in the gym, using dumbbells, using barbells, what can they actually do, what are they comfortable with, and then I can start to figure out how I can test them at the beginning, because if I don't have force plates and fancy equipment, then I'm going to have to figure out a way to see how strong they are, right? So just want to see where they're at strength training wise, test them, see what's going on, and then I can sort of direct them in the right way as to what exercise they should start with, what they should implement into their training program. But it's funny because I think I've had this conversation with you already before, but there's the thing that I would love for the training community to understand, and for coaches who are coaching these runners to relay back to them, is that the intensity that they train at is so much more important than like the program they're trying to seek within the gym. You know, I think that if I took Josh's program and gave it to someone who just started, they could probably do a lot of those exercises. There's nothing in there that like Josh did because he's been training for 20 years that someone who's only been training for 2 years couldn't do. But the weight, the way he moves it, the way he controls it would be very different to that person who's only been training for 1 to 2 years, right? So the thing that the message I like to give is that we're not trying to chase like doing new exercises or cool exercises or something that someone does on Instagram that you think is great because they have run a fast marathon and you think that's what you need to do because they're training that way. No, just keep it simple. Keep working on fundamental movements. Look to improve the intensity at which you're training. Well, keep the intensity at which you're training, and that will improve your strength. That will improve your ability to absorb load, to hold positions longer, and will then in turn make you a better runner.
Well, this is what the science backs up, right? This is what the science screams. It says when you strength train, you become more efficient, better runner, more powerful, better times. You know, these are the things that are really clear. And this isn't the first time we've had this conversation on this podcast, and it's not the first time we've had this conversation together. But it's still quite often there's some resilience towards that people don't really want to look at that or consider the strength training benefits. But if they are doing it, they're often just not doing it to the right intensity. And something you've spoken at before is the intent to work hard, you know, the intent to build fatigue. And yeah, what you're covering there is even the nuance around that as well, is the intent also depends upon your training history.
Yeah.
You probably got to build that up gradually, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And then if for someone who's just started out, so if we go back to the example I gave before, let's say someone who's come to see me for the first time, they've never strength trained before. They're just a runner, want to get a little bit stronger. I try to get them to, first of all, understand what an RPE is. You don't even have to say an RPE, but just get them to feel what something difficult is and something easy is.
Sometimes I say, does that feel eeasy, medium, or hard to you?
Yeah, that's it. That's RPE,
like,
right?
It's easy. Okay, right. We need a bit more load than that.
Yeah.
That's kind of medium. Okay, maybe a little bit more. Medium to hard. Okay, great with it.
But the problem I find, maybe you as well, is with the endurance athletes. I have this problem with one particular person. It's very frustrating. Is they are reluctant to push themselves and reluctant to put their body into like a RP of 9 out of 10, let's say, which RP is a rate of perceived exertion for people who don't know what that is. And let's say they're training at an intensity of 9 out of 10. They don't want to do that in the gym because they think that that's going to affect their run and they're going to be so sore and tired for their run. But it's like, this is why you're seeing someone like myself or Charlie or another S&C coach who's specifically tailored something for you so that it's not going to induce a very high amount of fatigue that should affect your other trainings, in particular the running, because that's important, right?
Or that you accept that it might for a little while, but in the end it'll be worth it.
Exactly, yeah. That maybe you have a little bit, which is normal, and it's you know, we're not doing it just before your race day.
Yeah.
If we're in a period of like pre-season training, let's say, that you can afford to have those moments where you're a little bit fatigued for your training sessions, right?
So this is periodization.
This is exactly where this comes into play, and I think that's the first hurdle I have to overcome is getting people to understand how to train with some intensity within the gym.
Yeah,
as for runners I'm talking about. And then the second one is trying to get them to understand the priority of where their running and their strength training should be. So I think most runners, if you ask them this question, they'll say, well, if I'm a runner, my running should be priority number one all the time. Well, I would disagree. I would say, I think for the majority of the year, yes, but there are periods and times of the year where you can sacrifice a little bit of your running intensity to focus on building up some strength, which will in turn make the times in which you do put running at priority number one a lot better. You'll be able to sustain longer runs. You'll be able to run faster. And this is where these are the two things I think that I have to really battle with people. And once I have them understanding that though, then I'm smooth sailing. But those are the two things that if I'm starting with someone, I think that everyone should really understand that and accept those parts of training, because if you don't, then you're not maximizing your training in the gym, I think.
Yeah. And if we're then going back to the gym and the exercises you choose, it sounds like you've got this really nice, simple, by the sounds of it, nothing too fancy, nothing kind of Instagram sexy. And this is a bit of a frustration of mine, is that actually algorithms tend to favor the ones that get the most attention, and things that grab attention tend to be novel and new, and I've not seen that before. That's interesting. So even I would do that as a viewer. It doesn't necessarily mean I know it's better. I'm just interested by it.
Yeah.
But actually, what really tends to work is the tried and tested, seemingly boring to an algorithm type of program, which involves a squat pattern, a deadlift pattern, some machines perhaps, and nothing wrong with that, and building your calf strength and doing stuff that doesn't actually look that interesting. But what you're describing is that it's the journey you go on within that, and the progressions you make through those movement patterns and through those loads that actually brings you the results.
Yeah, that's it. I had been sent this from a client of mine. It's not a running client, but had sent me an exercise of someone on Instagram he was on a Bosu ball with a cable in like a pal-off press, but like knees on the Bosu ball holding this pal-off, and it was like, oh, this would be great for my golf. And I was just like, I don't know if that would really be that great for you in like improving your, like for you improving golf.
Yeah, it's interesting because like, would it induce some fatigue? Yeah. Would it induce relevant fatigue? Maybe not. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, is that fatigue actually specific to what you're trying to achieve?
And then, it's just it. So I think that though, I don't, the extreme parts of Instagram with the exercises, once someone who's new to training goes to a good coach and has these experience and has this journey, I'd like to think that they become a bit more aware and they have some knowledge around like how to filter that out. But then there comes the other side of it where it's like, okay, let's say we'll use running as the example. At the moment, I see some of the top end runners. I say top end, maybe not. That's not the right word, but people who are in the better half of this general population and are Instagram runners, doing a lot of, I would say, like maximum velocity speed drills, which maybe we would use for sprinters. Now, are they like super useful for marathon runners or for like long distance runners? I would argue that, I'm not saying they're terrible, but I don't think that they serve like a massive place in someone who's training for like an endurance event, So they look sexy doing like A skips and B skips and these switches and all this stuff, and that's great. I think there's something that they definitely have a place and they can add some benefit, but should you be training maximal speed? Are you ever engaging in maximal velocity?
So you're almost raising this potential that's a marginal gain. That's potentially something an elite performer would look to.
Yeah.
But the average recreational runner, you start focusing too much on those marginal gains and you're going to miss out on a maximal gain.
Yeah. But it goes for, I guess, across all different sports and codes, right? Like when you're looking at someone who plays basketball at a recreational level, like should they be doing some of the like plyometric drills that someone in the NBA are doing? No, they don't need to do that. So, I think knowing it's hard. I don't expect general pop or people who are like who run just for fun or enjoy it and maybe just enjoying challenging themselves in races, which is great. I love that. I don't expect them to know these things, but I think there needs to be better context when coaches are posting about this.
Yeah,
and
I think that's it. You've just absolutely hit the nail on the head.
The delivery of it needs to be, they need to be more clear, because it can be, or even I would love, I know this is just like a fairy tale, but like I would love for Instagram to like sort of make sure that the coaches are like verified in a way to be able to give certain information. I know that would never happen, but you know, that's what you'd like to see, something like that.
Yeah. Well, the way it's set up at the moment is that attention is the thing that makes you popular. So therefore, things that grab attention are the things that are favoured. Which what we're saying here is that actually that's not the most appropriate thing for people to be using as their learning tool. Mm. I don't think there's a problem with people looking at it and being interested by that stuff, because it can sometimes be quite interesting. But that what you've just said there is that there should be some explicit explanation as to where this would fit, you know, why they're doing it and what they would include normally, or maybe just more posting of the day-to-day stuff they do, you know, not just this is really interesting and different. Let's post about that. It's like, could we also see what are you doing day in, day out? Because that will tell a better story.
Yeah, that's it. I think, again, goes back to this like sexy posting, right? People who post videos on exercises that they know haven't been seen, or they know that it is a little bit different and makes them look... it might express some sort of athleticism that makes them look really good, which is great. Those things are good, but context, like how often are you actually doing these drills? How often are you doing that sort of training? You know?
Exactly. So what are the things then you've got? Obviously, we've spoken so far about the strength training component. What else is important in a recreational runner's training plan? Let's go maximal gains. What are the maximal gains that someone's looking for?
So I am a big believer, and I love to push plyometric training. I'll go on into why I think it's good for runners, but I think just general population people need to incorporate some more plyometric training into their training routines. What I mean by plyometric training is jumping and landing. And I don't mean like just doing box jumps, because I think that's what people tend to think is just, you're jumping up on a box, and people get scared of it and whatever. I think it doesn't have to be that. It can be just like hopping or to jump forward, a bound, you know? There is a lot of benefits for aging populations, has been shown to help with dealing with the breakdown of tissue, breaking down of joints. And if we have better ability to absorb load, reduce force, and these like shock absorbers, the tendons being able to do that, they absorb the load better, then we're more resistant to breaking down.
It's really interesting, because I'm currently looking into longevity evidence at the moment, trying to think about a service that we might put together. And one of the things that I found in a recent study was that there's a few things they looked at different strength metrics and in fact lots of different health metrics for people as they age. It was this big population study out of Switzerland, and for healthy people in different decades of their life, what does their strength look like on a grip strength? What does their power look like on a counter movement jump? What does their muscle mass look like? And we all know that muscle mass is going to reduce as we age, and it seems to accelerate from our mid-40s, 50s onwards. And what they find is that grip strength seems to follow that. So a reduction in grip strength seems to predict a reduction in muscle mass. But what they found was most interesting was that the counter movement jump power was the most sensitive to pick up the people who lose the most or the quickest.
Oh, wow.
So power seems to be the thing. If you lose power, that seems to predict that you'll deteriorate a bit faster. So it's the early stage change in the muscle is explosive. Mm-hmm. The later stage is strength and size. So if we are looking, going back to what you just said there, is that including something explosive in your training will help to mitigate those age-related changes in the future, which are going to happen, but you want to slow those down or delay them. So that really supports the thing that I've found, which is fascinating, which I think is why it's important in longevity to be thinking of things like counter movement jump. But I mean, we haven't really been thinking of that in the world of health until recently. That actually that's an important factor. So it really backs up what we're finding there. So what if you then, if we deem that as important, how do you program that in? How much of that would they do in well, I guess firstly from a running performance perspective, but then also from a general health and healthy aging perspective?
So from a running performance perspective, again, it's just like anything, I suppose, we have to look at dosing it small amounts at a time for people who have never done it before, as well as like, this is probably where I guess I would like to think there is more of sort of like a exercise continuum, a plyometric continuum. There's like regressions, progressions of jumps. But I will say, I think if someone's already running and they've come to me to get a strength training program, I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing things like tall to short landings, because I feel like if they're already running, they're already doing loads and repetitions and repetitions and repetitions of landing and technically having small little jumps, aren't they? That landing and the force absorption is happening already.
And therefore coping with that. And if they're not injured, they're coping with those forces.
It, right? Yeah. So I tend to just go to seeing where they're at and what they can tolerate in terms of jumping technique and mechanics already. So we do stuff like just a single leg hop forward, and then we start with that.
As in an isolated or a repeated? So like a single hop?
No, like an isolated. Yeah. So we do one hop forward,
land,
try and stick and land, and then again hop forward, stick and land, hop forward, stick and land. Right?
So kind of almost a precursor to genuine plyometrics. Like, well, can you handle the movement pattern before we go a bit more into bouncing?
Yeah. I would have them doing some more deep tier plyometric jumps, which expose them to deeper landings. And again, like those tendons and the joints having to deal with load in deeper ranges. So then and actually will help with their mobility and getting them a bit looser as well. So I try to use those in sort of the start of their sessions and just get them playing around with it, because I think it can be quite fun. It doesn't have to be such a serious thing. It can be quite an experimenting, fun thing. And most of my clients really enjoy doing the plyometric work. But yeah, so once we have that base, just like building from small and less intense jumps and ones that expose the body to like deeper landings, but again with low intensity, not deep intensity, just something that is quite chill. They're bouncing in and out of like deep range squats or lunges. Then taking that up a bit, adding some more intensity to it, and then once they get good at it, trying to really push higher intensity jumps, hops, bounds, anything like that.
And what's the difference between the plyometrics that you tend to use in your sessions versus those sprint-based plyometric technique drills that you referenced that might not always be that relevant?
So again, the sprint-based ones, I think you have to have like a higher level of like movement competency to execute some of those, which when we look at these plyometric jumps and movements I'm getting some of my clients to do when they start, or when they're like coming from a running background, they're not so like sprint specific, and they're not requiring a lot of technique or movement proficiency, I suppose, with them, right? They can actually just focus on producing force and landing and jumping and land. That's it. That's all they have to focus on. I'm trying to get them to do something that their bodies are able to do, but just repeatedly do it, right? And then when they advance the jumps, or when they advance the plyometrics that they're doing, there might be a little bit of coaching and teaching that they need to understand, but again, it's not massive. It's not a huge amount that they have to take on and develop, but it'll be easy for them once they've built a base. They can progress it and then again start to increase the intensity slowly. But things that are more specific and a bit more, they will translate better into the endurance-based, running-based movements. So again, the jumps that I'm asking them to do would be less intense, higher repetitions, which is better for someone who's doing an endurance event who are doing less intense, higher repetition movements, right? Or like landings.
So less technique and skill based and more about generating the resilience to the movement and the tolerance to the sets. Yeah.
Which I find in the the sprinting drills, it is like 5 meters of movement, lots of rest, and then again 5 meters movement, lots of rest.
Yeah, which is super specific to sprinters.
Yeah.
But actually, again, you're saying that it doesn't necessarily mean that transfers over into performance in longer distances.
No, I think, the argument I'm making is, I'm not saying it's completely wrong. I'm just trying to say, I'm trying to ask the question, is there a better alternative to just doing sprinting drills for marathon runners?
What's going to move the needle the most? So then we've got strength training in general, and gradually building up their load, and then making sure the intensity's there. We've got the plyometrics that are specific to endurance athletes. How would you manage their running loads? What's the kind of information you would give them about balancing their runs either side of their gym routine?
Yeah, so this one, it's tough because I get, in an ideal world, I would like it to be a certain way, but I think with other people, running coaching programs, for example, like I'm going to use Runner as an example. I think what they do is great. They have great running programs, and the way that they've programmed it out for people is fantastic, but it doesn't take into consideration the way people are working, the stresses that they deal with, the family life that they have, the social life that they have. It doesn't take into consideration a lot of different things, where I feel like if I'm writing someone a running program and a strength training program, I have to take into consideration everything that is going on within that person in their lifestyle, right? So if I had full reign of their running and strength training, then I'd probably give them a rest in between their strength work and their running days. But yeah, this is why this is another thing I find hard. If someone has got another coach, or if following a program, another running program. But yeah, I think if there is a possibility for people to put in a rest day, now in that rest day doesn't necessarily mean totally do nothing. It could be that you do what some of my clients like to call a shakeout run, where they're doing something where they're just like ticking the legs over and, like, again, like they say, flushing the legs out. Whereas that's good for some people that have the ability to tolerate large amounts of running load, right? But if you're just someone who's trying to run for a 10K or a half marathon, for example, let's say, and you work a normal job Monday to Friday, you have a family, you don't have loads of time, then I would say sticking to 2 to 3 days of running, 2 days of strength training, and just keeping that. You don't have to increase the actual volume of days of training. You don't need to do that. Just focus on having those 5 days of training, set them for a 12 to 14 week period of time, and just see how you get on with it. Like, just see how you progress through those 12 weeks. You don't need to train 7 days a week.
Yeah.
You don't need to double up days with sessions either. That's also something that really grinds my gears, but you don't need to do that. You don't need to chase, if you miss a session because you're on the weekend out with your family, like, you don't need to chase that session, double it up on another day either. You will do enough training if you have, like, if you apply the right intensity to those days that you've got within your week, you know?
Do you think that sometimes that expectation of perfection within training means that in the end people fall out of love with it, and maybe it affects their actual enjoyment of what they do?
For sure, 100%. I think the expectation of it at the beginning for a lot of people can be off-putting, and then also, like, even just in a normal fitness journey for someone who's trying to lose 10 kilos, let's say, for example, the first 2 weeks is generally the easiest bit because it's the fun start, and then having to replicate that for the next 2 months is a different story. So but just like in the same way, someone who's running to run a training to run a marathon, someone who's training to lose 15 kilos, you're going to have times in your journey where you fall off the horse, you have something happen in that time that you slip up on, whether it be eating, whether it be missing a training session because you're hungover, whether it be you having a small injury that requires you to take a week off training. When you have those moments, you have to remember that you can always just go back to where you were. You don't have to double up loads, or you've not lost any. You've not lost any of your gains. There's nothing changed there. Something, you just accept that the experience has just happened. You accept what just happened to you, and then just move on. As in, get back onto what you were doing. Get back on the plan. Don't chase it. Just go back to where you left off and just continue on where you were going. That's it.
Yeah, and I think what's coming out here is that programming, the way that you're describing it, is much more of an art than it is a science. You have to just adapt to the person in front of you, their life situation, and help manage their expectations. Because when we, and I include myself in this, are left to our own decisions, we get lost in the emotion we chase. We think we know best, and I don't coach myself very well at all. I make terrible decisions for myself. I rehab myself poorly from injury. I need an external to help me make rational, logical choices for my training and for my injury recovery. And that takes some level of stepping back and some level of distance to ensure you do that. Otherwise, you get wrapped up in the emotion of it. So, therefore, it does allow you to balance both the art, the science, using your fundamental principles, not getting too carried away with what's going on. So this is something I'm coming to more and more now in my own practice. Is that sure, there's science and there's literature and there's evidence, but I have to be able to cherry pick the relevant parts for the person in front of me, especially for general population. I think for elite athletes, we get away with being a bit more, fundamentally perfect, if we want to try and use that word, because we can get away with that because they've got the perfect training week and we can use the evidence in order to do that. But for most people, it's a bit messier than that.
Well, this is why I say, like, when someone says, what's perfect training week for a runner? Well, the perfect training week for a runner is, if I could create it, it would be for someone that doesn't have to do anything other than run or like train for running, right? But just as you said, there's people live a life, and within that life, they have to work, they have a family, they have whatever other things they need to do. And that we have to take those things in consideration. I think that there's a lot, like you say, the literature that comes out, the studies that come out, they're all great, but we have to take them really with a pinch of salt and maybe think about how we can utilize them in a practical setting, as opposed to just taking them and saying, oh, they did this study on a group of people, I'm going to implement this straight away. And it just can't be done that way. I was actually saying this to another physio here the other day, that this might be, a little bit controversial, but whilst I do like to read and see literature and studies being done and new evidence coming out, I think it's great. What I personally like to see more is coaches who've been coaching people for a long, long time give me sort of evidence or some results based off like their coaching experiences.
Yeah. This is still evidence-based medicine, by the way. So if we evidence-based practice is not just about studies and literature, it's also about your experiences within the field, and that's something people forget. And you can't always study that because it does include more of an art, and the definition of sort of scientific studies, they control lots of variables. That's not possible within our practice. In our day job, you can't control those variables, so you just learn to observe the findings of that in your own way. So it's your own scientific experiment, but it's a messy one where variables aren't controlled, but you can still pick up on patterns because it's yours. And the more times you see it, the more patterns you pick up. So it's absolutely relevant. I completely buy into your experience there, because I think it's absolutely right. We don't think about it that way enough. I don't think is that experience is experience for a reason, especially if you're trying to learn it. You're trying to broaden your horizons, keep an open mind. You're aware of differences that come along and contradict your previous beliefs. So as long as you're open-minded enough as a coach, as a practitioner, you're then able to learn from those thousands of hours of experience that you now have. if you're closed-minded and biased and you stick to one rigid way of thinking, that's the point at which it's not necessarily evidence-based. So
yeah.
So I think that's a crucial difference.
If that was the case as well, if we stuck to what research had come out 20 years ago, if someone was coaching that way now, you'd be like, what the hell is that guy doing?
But people do.
You're right. Yeah. This is why like the evidence-based practice is so important, because we can look at research from 20 years ago, but time's progressed. We've changed. People have found, not just tested in a lab setting with researchers, but people have gone and done their own testing within their own community, their own client base. And they figured out that this is not the right way, or this has not worked. This is how we get new fads and ideas forming, right?
Well, based on that, you just said, well, this is how we figure out how things have worked. What kind of things do you use? We've spoken about force plate testing for some people. It might be relevant. But what other things do you use to track? What metrics, or what ways do you help keep people engaged and committed, accountable to their training?
Are we talking about runners specifically, or just everybody in general?
Up to you.
Yeah, I think the strength part is massive. I like to use measures for them and set sort of goals, whether it be like, as of their body weight, trying to hit a 1.5 times body weight goal on, let's say, a deadlift, for example, right? So using strength measures, or more so some like goals for them to hit. That's how I try to keep them more motivated, strength wise. And then also with performance, just trying to get them testing, but not so often, more just like get them testing in a way that they know that test is coming in a period of time. So let's say today we test, and then say to them, okay, mate, we're going to train now, and your next testing session is in 4 months' time. Give them a good period of time to be able to train, have adaptations, and then see how their training has influenced whatever they're trying to train for. So if it is a marathon, or if it is a run, get them to do a 5K, 10K trial, and then in 4 months' time, get them to do it then. But making sure that it isn't so frequent. I don't think that they need to be tested all the time, and I don't think they need to think about those things all the time. I think they need to just think about replicating their training week, and just putting in the work and putting in the intensity week on week, and then stay focused on trying to work towards that, whatever it is. Even if it's a race, we can use the race as a test, but whatever that is we're using to test in 4 months' time. That's how I like to do it, as opposed to just looking at everything week on week. I don't want people to do that. I think that's where it happens in something like fat loss as well. Weight loss is a perfect example that everyone can relate to. If you check your weight after 1 week and you don't lose weight, and you're like, oh,
that's not working.
That's not working. I'm not going to do it anymore, But we know that over a long term, that's where we get the changes. And it's the same thing with performance. It's not going to take just 1 week to make you fast. We need a long period of you adhering to a training program and putting in the work to be able to see some changes.
Consistency.
That's the word.
So consistency is what we're after, which then makes complete sense as to everything you have just been describing around the art of programming, making sure that they can be consistent, because we know that people live lives, and we're working with Gen Pop. We're working with people who have day jobs, who have families, who have commitments, who have days when they can't be bothered, who have days when they're hungover. So therefore, you be consistent within their frame, within their lens, within their world, within their. So once you've got that consistency, you'll get results in the end, which then is why we should be cautious around these Instagram influencers who may not have that same life as you, and may not have the same frustrations and difficulties. So you, instead of looking to other people as to your comparison, you're looking at yourself. What were you like yesterday or 4 months ago?
Yeah.
To try and make yourself better. It sounds like that's what you're doing. You're really individualizing the programs for them.
Yeah. And then this got me thinking then when you were asking me about how do I keep motivated, or how do I see their progress. It's just really that is trying to make sure that it is solely based on them. I don't at all actually say, oh, well, JP did this. This is where that's really not a great thing to be doing for anybody. I'm not comparing myself to an NBA player when I'm looking at my jump height, like why would I do that to myself?
Yeah. You're looking at what you were a few months ago, 4 months ago, perhaps. Yeah.
So, and then again, it's giving yourself an ample period of time to show that you've actually made some, or to test whether what you've been doing is working or not.
Yeah.
I think in the endurance world, so many whoops, watches, all this stuff, we have so much data on how we're performing, and it just can change so much based on so many things. It's not just whether you're training enough. I think that is the issue I have with it, is when people look at it and they think, oh, it's my training that is the thing that's messed up my training times, or I'm not training hard enough, or whatever. Like, that's the reason why I'm not running fast.
Especially with women, where hormones are so much of a variable. It's going to change based on their cycle, the time in the cycle.
I think for any personal trainers watching this, if you understand female hormones and the periods of the cycle and how that affects training, if you can make your female clients understand that, you're going to have such a big win, and they're going to be so trusting in you, right? I think that's a basic thing for people to understand. Yeah. But that could be used for running as well, like for everybody, that you have to get people to understand that it isn't just about your training that influences your result of your run. There's so many things that influence the result of your run.
And I think we're as we're coming now to the end, when I normally ask, what does Better Never Ends mean to you? It sounds, you've almost answered it a little bit. It's kind of individualizing and kind of helping them see for themselves what their journey looks like. But maybe if there's anything more personal, what does Better Never Ends mean to you, or to the way that you practice? How does that map out in your own life or your own practice?
What does Better Never Ends? Well, I'm a big believer that you should never be complacent. You should never sort of be happy as like where you're at in terms of growth.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily mean in terms of like achievement, but I mean in terms of like you growing as a person, intellectually, with your relationships, across all different things. And I think always wanting to learn and always being humble to accept that sometimes you're going to be wrong and your opinions might not always be right. And being open to learning. That's what I believe is like, maybe goes with what the question you asked me. I'm not sure if I've answered it correctly,
I think that's really nice, because you've touched on it on a deeper level actually than what we were initially thinking of like your practice and your training. You've gone deeper, which I think actually is even better. That's what I believe it's that too. But it's nice to hear other people kind of have that connection as well. How would someone get in touch with you, Nick, if they want to find out a bit more about you, if they want to work with you, if they want to learn from you?
I'm actually on Spotify as the Australian Skepta. You can listen to my album. I'm on Instagram as Coach Nick Garcia. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. And you can follow my stuff. Should throw me a couple likes, some comments. That'd be great.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks so much for coming into the podcast today, Nick. It's been great. Any bars you want to spit, or are we just going to hold that for next time?
No, next time. I'm going to have an album drop next time for you, Charlie.
Lovely. Great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Better, provider of health, wellness and performance services based in central London. You can book in for face-to-face services at either of our 2 clinics, one in Soho and one in the city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Better Never Ends, or head over to our website for more information about the clinics or the podcast at www.betterneverends.com. And of course, if you want to send us an email with any feedback, questions or suggestions for future episodes, then email us on podcast@betterneverends.com. And finally, thanks to Brian Long for editing the show. Without him, it's absolutely no doubt in my mind that these would never have seen the light of day. And it will allow this podcast to continue on for as long as I'll keep recording them. So thanks very much, Brian.